with the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind. Enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. So we're presently in the 9th chapter of the Treasury of Precious Qualities. And this chapter deals with how we apply our commitment to the Bodhisattva vow. And particularly, then we are looking at among the two aspects of engaging the enlightened, the vow, the commitment to bodhicitta, the Bodhisattva vow. There's two aspects to this, and there is then the aspect of aspiration and application. And we're looking presently at the application, which is explained in terms of the 6 paramitas. And we're looking at the paramita of discipline. And within the paramita of discipline, there's 3 sections. One is, you could say, what it is that we don't do. And the other one is then what we do. And we've actually looked quite extensively at the monastic, or not just the monastic, but what we call the 3 vows, which include the monastic vows and the vows of what we call individual liberation, and how that combines together with the Bodhisattva vow and the vow of the knowledge holders, or the Vidyadharas. So that which is then the Vajrayana. And that's where you could say this constitutes what we sometimes see, particularly in the context of Chögyam Trungpa, we see explained in terms of Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. So we've looked at the vows. Last time we looked at the practice of gathering virtue, and we're presently then going to go into looking at the last of these 3 sections in the paramita of discipline, which is then the discipline of benefiting others. So we look at the root verses, the root verse, which says 74, which says, skilled in means direct and indirect, they labor for the benefit of every being. They open wide the doors of generous giving, of pleasing speech and inspiration to the practice of conduct that accords with teachings given, and discipline that gathers virtue. Okay, so let's look at Kangyur Rinpoche's comment on this, where he says, Bodhisattvas pursue to their ultimate limit the 3 aspects of skillful means. They perfect the 2 accumulation, they bring others to spiritual maturity, and they have the ability to perceive and manifest pure fields. So that's essentially where the Bodhisattva practice constitutes, the Bodhisattva path constitutes the 2 accumulations, the accumulation of merit. You could say everything that has to do with our relative reality, but the aspect of relative reality that connects us to enlightenment, and that's what we call punya, or merit. And the other is wisdom, simply seeing through the way that appearances very often blind us. And so that these 2 accumulations really constitute the core of the Mahayana path. But what they also do then, and we're talking bodhisattvas here, not just benefiting themselves through the 2 accumulations, but also bringing others to spiritual maturity, setting others onto the path. And then finally, they have the ability to manifest pure realms. And this we actually see around teachers. Teachers have the ability, of course, we can only see it according to our limited capacity, but teachers actually create environments. They create spaces. And in the greater sense, we also talk about this as manifesting as, you could say, entire worlds. For example, Sukhavati, or the copper-colored mountain, and so on. But that's essentially where you could say the teacher's grace, the teacher's greatness manifests a space in which enlightenment can take place. And this like I say, we see this also in terms of living teachers. So we talk about these 3 aspects really of the practice of purification, and let's just see what they have here. Jiangsong Mingsum, yeah. Yeah, Tsok Min Jiangsong. Oh yeah, sorry. So perfection, which refers to the two accumulations, the maturation referring to others, and then purification, manifesting pure realms. So that's the way that bodhisattvas then can labor for others, their discipline of benefiting others. And it says here, it is thus that they labor earnestly for the immediate and ultimate welfare of others. And this we always see. On the immediate level, well-being. On the ultimate level, enlightenment. Directly, they give in charity to the needy, while indirectly, they give the gift of Dharma, encouraging beings to engage in positive action. They are rich too in the 4 methods of attracting disciples. This is something that's a theme that sort of runs throughout the notion of benefiting others. These 4 doing Rinpoche in Tibetan, the 4 aspects of attracting disciples. The 4 methods are material generosity, skill in teaching the Dharma in ways that are delightful and appropriate to the individual hearer, the ability to inspire people to undertake the practice and practicing perfectly what one preaches. So that's where they, you could say, exceed beyond teachers as we ordinarily understand it. Anyway, it says here, bodhisattvas are in themselves expert in the discipline of gathering virtue, and this in turn nourishes the 4 abilities just mentioned. It is thus that they throw open wide the door of generous giving, and their capacity to work for others is immense. So 75 and 76. Regarding altruistic action, though the teachings speak of 6 considerations, in short, this means the judgment of the strength of one's own practice. Let those who never wander from the Dharma path secure the good of others. Common people who have not yet gained their own good should investigate their own deluded thoughts. When one can achieve the great good of another, it is then that lower precepts may be left aside. A village may be sacrificed to save a town. One's home may be relinquished to preserve one's life. And for the sake of Dharma, one may sacrifice oneself. Okay. So Kangyur Rinpoche comments. It's said that working for others involves 6 considerations: oneself, others, material poverty and wealth, and spiritual poverty and wealth. So here we are, us and the others. We're going to work for others, right? Then we can do that on a you could say material level or on a spiritual level. He says the categories of self and other encompass those of poverty and wealth, both spiritual and material, because they naturally form the context in which the latter occur. So this is what we can offer to others, things that are tangible and intangible. And self-concern and altruism themselves depend on the strength or weakness of one's Dharma practice. So basically, when is one ready to benefit others? Those who truly possess the Dharma qualities of transmission and realization. Remember, this is really how we understand the Dharma, which is, on one hand, there is everything that has been taught, but there's also everything that we have realized personally. And that's where you could say the Dharma comes down to us, luckily, not just as theory, but also as a living tradition of individuals who have a living experience of what they are teaching. So with that, possessing that truly, such individuals, they would never diverge from the teaching because of distraction and the pressures of daily life. And such individuals must devote themselves mainly to working for others. If, however, altruistic action is a matter of external appearance only, others are not genuinely helped thereby, and one's own qualities deriving from the three trainings will degenerate. This is actually really interesting because it's so often that we think that benefiting others is something about behavior, what we do. But the thing is, if we only look at what is external and what is perceived by others, you know, it might look as if we are benefiting others if it's only on the level of appearance. But in fact, if we don't really have what it takes, if we don't have the genuine qualities, then actually, even though there might be sort of some sort of structure in place, nobody's really benefiting. It doesn't help the one or the other. And also the individual then that supposedly is helping others is not really actually benefiting and is in fact just being distracted from their own practice of the three trainings. So that's where we would say it's important that somebody who benefits others is like a medicinal plant that has actually gained strength to the degree that its own fruit, the own fruits of this medicinal plant that can benefit others, and not that one cuts the plant itself. One waits until there actually is fruit, and you cut the fruit from the plant itself, but the plant doesn't die. Otherwise, it's a bit like if you take a medicinal plant and as soon as it's sprouted, then you just cut it. And that's where those that are not ready, benefiting others wouldn't be of much help. So that's where it wouldn't benefit neither oneself nor others. Discipline will become distorted, concentration dissipated, and wisdom obscured. These are the three trainings: discipline, concentration, and wisdom. And these will degenerate. It is consequently important for beginners in the practice who are prone to such eventualities to examine themselves mindfully and with vigilance. So that's where there has to be a good solid degree of self-reflection. They must identify their deluded thoughts and defilements and apply themselves to training in skillful means, reinforcing the antidotes that will eliminate their faults. So that's where individuals on the path, they operate continually. We on the path, we operate continually with the humble recognition of our own confusion, and at the same time, the workability of the situation, that we actually are doing something, we are taking the medicine, we are taking the remedy, and so on. But there is the awareness that we do have deluded thoughts and defilements. And it says then, by doing this, they will be genuinely working for others. It's only when one is in a position to bring really great benefit to the doctrine and beings, then one is permitted to lay aside the lesser rules, such as the precepts of the lower vows, that are themselves geared towards one's ultimate benefit and the immediate welfare of others. So that's where someone who would either stay in retreat or abide by, you could say, the strict monastic or rules or the pratimoksha vows, the Hinayana vows, if you like, who then, you could say, practice generosity and go outside of their retreat to their monastery and begin to serve others. So that's where you could say, there's a sacrifice taking place in terms of relinquishing particular structures, but it really serves a greater benefit and there's no harm. At that time, the Bodhisattva is not harming themselves and exclusively are then actually benefiting others, even though they might ostensibly not be abiding by the strict parameters of retreat or monasticism. It says here, to save a city, one may sacrifice a village. To save one's life, it's reasonable to give up one's house. So there you sort of balance, you know, am I gonna die in here in the house, or am I going to leave the house and let the house burn down? It's sort of that sort of thing. So that's where it just makes sense for the Bodhisattva to then benefit others. And it says here then, and for the sake of spreading the Dharma of transmission and realization on a vast scale, one may sacrifice oneself. Now this, of course, should be understood in the context of where one is actually at. It shouldn't mean that one sacrifices one's life unless one really is at that level, but there's just a sense of being more concerned about others than oneself when it's at that level. So this really concludes the discussion of the paramita of a discipline, Shila. So we've covered the two first paramitas, the paramita of generosity and the paramita of discipline, dana and Shila. And now we come to the paramita of patience, Shanti. So verse 77 reads, upon the ground of unafraid endurance, the perfumed sense of Dharma is diffused, protected by three kinds of patience, putting up with hardship, making light of any injury, and braving the profundity of doctrine. So here then, it says, then practitioners are engaged in the training of discipline. Fearless patience is their great resource and mainstay. Let me just read that again, sorry. You know, I'm curious, if not, this could be a typo. I'm just thinking if it could say when practitioners are engaged. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a typo. In the book, it says when.
It does say when. Hey, thank you. Good. I was just about to look it up. Thanks. Thanks for that. Yeah. So when practitioners are engaged in the training of discipline, fearless patience is their great resource and mainstay. Yeah. Just make a note on that here. Okay. Patience is essentially the tenacious ability to bear with suffering. It is the fertile soil in which the flowers of Dharma, in other words, the three disciplines, can grow and spread their perfume of good quality. So remember, the three disciplines are then the reining in of negative actions, the enduring or the practice of what is wholesome, and then benefiting others. So as such, then, patience is the ability to bear suffering and the fertile soil where the flowers of Dharma can grow and spread their perfume and good qualities. Encircling these flowers like a protective fence are the three kinds of patience. It's very beautiful. The first is the patience to bear the sufferings and difficulties that occur while one is striving for the twofold goal, Buddhahood for one's own sake and the accomplishment of the welfare of others. So that's the difficulties that take place at that time. The second kind of patience is the ability to put up with the injuries that others might inflict. Okay, that's the sort of the annoying presence of others that somehow bug one. One needn't seek this, actually. This comes quite naturally. And then, while the third kind is the ability to confront without fear or apprehension the doctrine of emptiness and other profound teachings. And this is interesting. We actually talk about that as a kind of patience. It's simply that emptiness, which you could say completely goes against our habitual habit of seeing things as real. It's a very provocative dimension. It's where we set ourselves free, but it also means going out of our comfort zone. It means that we let go of our already existing habits and assumptions. And that, you could say, requires patience. That requires a willingness to actually be open. We're sort of used to sort of retreating into a comfortable, habitual way of seeing things. And emptiness, what the Buddha is telling us about reality, is about opening up beyond our projections and our addiction to our projections. So that's an important point, really, that the third kind of patience is this willingness to, we call it then, endure emptiness. 78 reads, the evil state of anger with its dark and creeping tendrils makes the mind and heart extremely hard. Those afraid of hell, whence there is no escape, will give no chance for anger to develop. So that's where we can see anger is just not a good thing. Now, when it says we won't get out of hell, it's not that we ultimately believe that there is no end, but it's just when things are uncomfortable, they seem to last for a very long time. And hell is very uncomfortable. So that's where we talk about it as being a place of no escape. Anyway, it says here then, indulgence in anger and all its dreadful manifestations is like a darkness that throws a pall of every joy over every joy and happiness, hardening the mind and making it pitiless and cruel. I think most of us can sort of nod in recognition to that. The creeping tendrils of every kind of evil spreads out from it, killing, striking, wounding, acts that propel the agent into one of the hell realms, whence there is no escape, which just goes on for a very long time. Those who fear the prospect of falling into hell are careful never to give the slightest rein to thoughts of anger. As it is said in the Bodhicharyavatara, no evil is there similar to anger, no austerity can be compared with patience. Steep yourself, therefore, in patience in various ways, insistently. So this is it's important that we recognize there's a very constructive note in this. There's an identifying of how anger is negative, but it's also that something can be done about it. And that's where the message here, of course, is that anger is terrible, but it's also the message is really that something can be done, and that is patience. So 79 then reads, harmful circumstances are like forest thorns. There is no overcoming them. They constantly increase. But if we tame the single source of anger and resentment, the hard austerity of patience will become our friend. So then this patience then is understood as follows. The mischiefs that flow from anger are boundless. Just as it is impossible to remove the briars from a forest of thorns, so that the only way to escape harm is not to go there, it is impossible to halt the onslaught of adversity. It befalls us constantly and without reprieve. Irritated and dismayed by what we do not want, we experience impulses of anger and resentment that are hard to control. Everyone's mind is infected in this way. Okay, this is again where we might be practitioners of the Mahayana, we might have taken the Bodhisattva vow, but again, we could say we're only human. Yet there's a place where we go that goes beyond that saying, because when we say we're only human, we say, oh yeah, well, let's just accept we are imperfect. But in the Buddha's teaching, we say, yeah, we are imperfect, and that's why there are consequences of that imperfection, which are incredibly painful. And that's where we'd want to do something about that. So while we say we acknowledge the fact that we do have anger, we also realize that something needs to be done. Kangyur Rinpoche says, the first thing to occur is the perception that a given object is in some way unwanted, and then feelings of displeasure arise. Okay, this is where we need to have self-reflection. We need to have that introspection that knows there's something, some circumstance that annoys us, and what then happens on the basis of that external circumstance is something arises within ourselves. Now, we very often fall into the trap of thinking that person out there, there's something wrong with them. But no, they are just an object. It's our interpretation. It's from our vantage point that they're annoying. It's not that there's anything in the object itself. And this is so important that we can divorce these two, the object, which is really beyond good and bad, and the subjective perception that labels this annoying. So that's where we need to be very clear on, and have sufficient, you could say, maturity or self-reflection to identify that it's not in the object, it's in the subject. The projection is taking place. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't all of a sudden just accept everything, but it means that we need to be aware of where exactly this, you could say, this toxic condition that doesn't see clearly, and which is not going to be very helpful in dealing with particular circumstances, where we need to identify that this toxicity sits within ourselves. So that's where this is where Kangyur Rinpoche very wisely says the first thing is then that there's a perception that is an object that is in some way unwanted, yeah, and then feelings of displeasure arise. If, however, we're able to bring the impulse under control before it hardens and becomes established, the arduous practice of patience will prove a good friend. So that's where patience is something that's going to help us tremendously. As the proverb says, hit the pig on the nose, clean the lamp while it's still warm. So if you're dealing with pigs, then you could actually, pigs are sort of getting unruly, you hit them on the nose. This we can take at face value, coming from people who deal with pigs. I don't personally have any experience, but actually cleaning the lamp while it's still warm, that's something that if you've ever had to do with butter lamps, then cleaning them right when they're just, while they're still warm, is very easy. It's a bit like cleaning the pot when you've been boiling milk. If you leave the pot for a while, then it all hardens. But if you clean it right away after you boil the milk, it's very easy. So the footnote here says, see Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche in Enlightened Courage, page 61. When an angry pig rears up at us, if we hit it on the nose with a stick, it will immediately run around and turn away, unable to bear the pain. If we clean the butter lamp while it's still warm, the job is very easily done. Okay. 80. Through contact with the dart of harsh and hostile words, our hearts are stricken through, and yet does anything occur? Because we take such words as harmful in themselves, we are pained and agitated in the interplay of harm and harmed. So that's a little bit where we have this saying about sticks and stones. So similarly here, when we are criticized by someone, our hearing faculty and consciousness all interact. Our hearing faculty and consciousness all interact so that the statement provokes a strong feeling of displeasure. This is where we need to again apply this, you could say, very detached analysis that sees that somebody says, Jakob, you idiot, right? That's the hearing. Then there's consciousness that generates an image of that identifies me as a solid individual, and the dislike of this solid sense of identity that emerges. And so that all takes place within the consciousness. And then there's a dislike. Me, idiot. I don't like that. So that's where we need to sort of be quite clear again that there's really just a process that takes place. There's really just a set of conditions that come together. There's no hard and fast, I was attacked, I'm hurt. Oh yeah, that's the thing we say, right? I'm hurt, you called me an idiot, now I'm hurt. But if actually what it takes for that hurt to arise is actually a set of assumptions that we seem to be blind to, or a process that we seem to be unaware of, that the process actually is based on the assumption of that there's something out there that we solidify both in terms of the object, the words that come at us, and the subject that's hearing it. That's where we can see there's a big difference between when we are relaxed and somebody calls an idiot, and then we're just sort of like, okay, yeah, well, if you think so, or if we're really sort of uptight, and then we go, oh, I'm so hurt, right? So this is where we're very fortunate, many of us, to be in a situation where we can be heard and where you can actually observe this process. Kangyur Rinpoche is completely sympathetic to this. It's not like he's saying, get over yourself, particularly. He's just asking us to please investigate. And he says, a sharp sensation of pain is experienced as if an arrow had pierced our heart and torn it open. So he's completely sympathetic to this. Nevertheless, if the situation is examined properly, we can see that the words themselves have an echo-like quality, right? I mean, the object, that's just, they are mere sound. And as mere sound, they come from no one and are directed at no one. The words themselves, idiot, I-D-I-O-T, that is just a sound. You know, it's not directed. You could stand in a canyon and you can yell across the canyon and you can hear the echo. The echo itself doesn't come with good or bad. The sound itself is you could say, doesn't have a bias towards to one side or the other. Even if they appear to hit their mark, they are in themselves unable to inflict real damage. And I forget the exact English, you know, as a kid, I went to an English school, and there we used to have this saying about sticks and stones may break your bones, but words, something like words can't do that. So some of you might know this poem anyway. So that's where the words in themselves, they are unable to do anything. Now, but what normally happens in this kind of situation, Kangyur Rinpoche says, our habitual way of thinking, which identifies the word with the thing, right? So that's where we link up the word with a particular significance. Jakob is an idiot, yeah? Takes the word as genuinely harmful. So-and-so said I was an idiot in front of others, yeah, and so on. And the interplay of an assailant and assailed is set in motion. Thus we are disturbed and suffer. So, 81, 82. For in this world, our hurts in cause and fruit, like shouts and answering echoes, all arise from us. If I does not arise, there's no one they can injure. See how they derive from factors earlier contrived. When examined, they are not great harms, but great advantages. For thanks to them, we board the ship of patience, thus to gain the jewel of bodhicitta. Let us honor all such hurts as holy teaching. Now, this is seriously provocative and not a joke. This is actually intended for us to do. And this is where the men and women have done this from the time of the Buddha down until today, and it's something that anyone can do at any given time. And it's not easy, but it's ever so worthwhile, as we can see. In our present situation, all the causes of physical and mental suffering, beating, fighting, robbing, slander, and the like, seem to come from other people. All right? But the cause of them is all in ourselves. They are like booming echoes returning to their source. And that's where we would say that these things, that there will never be anything that happens to us that doesn't come on the basis of our previous actions, whether it's in this life or in previous lives. We would never say things just happen just out of the blue. We, of course, don't know what the original cause is. But unless we believe in some sort of thing where everything just happens for no rhyme or reason, then if we understand and what we can observe, how cause and effect exists without the universe, then it applies similarly that all our experience and conditioning is due to the seeds that have been planted previously. So this is something, once we accept that, then we would always understand that this is simply just the nature of things. It's not about us saying, oh, I am bad, therefore I'm being punished. That's not what it's saying. But it's simply just saying it's the nature of these things to come to us. Of course, this has serious ramifications, and sometimes we can say, oh, it is so unfair. I am being unfairly treated, or others are subject to what seems to be completely unfair. So this is a big topic, but it is essential that we grasp this point. And it's not something that just is sort of comes from some moral system just out of the blue prescribing we should be in one way or another, but it really comes from us observing the nature of our reality. So then it says, so that's in terms of how things play out, but in terms of also the way that we have this sense of I am, you could say, subject to this experience, then it has so much to do with the degree to which we solidify and are, you'd say, fixated on ourselves. And this comes and goes. Like I said, sometimes we're very relaxed, sometimes we can be very uptight, but it all comes back to this place where there's an attribution of an I. And that's where it says, indeed, if we had no ego clinging, there would be no one for the enemy to attack. So we should reflect how situations of conflict are called forth by our own past actions. So again, that's where you could say the situation due to previous actions comes about due to previous actions, and also that there is then in the present moment there is a sense of I. If there was just an openness, then someone could attack us, and it's like, you know, that we just don't. There's no place for it to land. So that's where we appreciate really that we can see this in our own experience, that we can be more or less uptight, and that's also where we can take that to the nth degree and say where we could not have any kind of, you could say, fixation on this self. And that, of course, is what we admire in the sages, and that is what we are aspiring to, and that is what this situation is really encouraging us to open up and become greater individuals. So that's what it says. Moreover, if we think about it, we can see that patience can only ever arise in adversity, which is consequently not negative, but extremely beneficial. Meaning that if these situations didn't arise, if we were always together with nice people, then actually this sort of underlying toxicity or this potential disaster that is our clinging to the self, it might not sort of be visible, but it's always there. So that's where it just remains dormant. And it's thanks actually to adverse circumstances that we actually realize that that neurotic potential is there. And that's where we should thank those that actually, or be grateful for the circumstances in which this arise. So that's where it says, thanks to the hostility of enemies, we can embark on the ship of patience and sail upon the ocean of the Mahayana, gaining for ourselves the precious jewel of bodhicitta, the source of immediate and ultimate benefit for self and others. Enemies should therefore be looked upon as the object and source of patience. They are as worthy of offerings as the sacred Dharma itself. Now, this might sound extreme, but it's not really, because we can think about it, how valuable it is for us to engender this insight of patience, this quality of patience. And this is not about us becoming doormats or something unhealthy in which we all of a sudden begin to accept things that are not healthy, but it's really just that we begin to have an openness and intelligence that is not, you could say, veiled and plunged into darkness due to this condition of anger. We might need to still do something about it. If somebody's breaking into our house, being angry is not necessarily the way to deal with it. Of course, it makes sense to make sure that we, protect ourselves, call the police, deal with the burglar, whatever it might be. But the degree to which we're angry actually will will make our ability to act much less. If we look at action movies or dramas, we can always see that it's only when people keep their cool that they're actually effective in, you could say, dealing with difficult circumstances. So for us to be able to practice our cool and be patient, we actually should be grateful that there are circumstances that give us the opportunity to train in that. And the thing is also that this is where it turns around, because that's where we're actually being benefited. And the person, the assailant, if you like, is actually someone that is helping us. So we should be grateful to that person. And not only that, we should actually, moreover, you could say, we should be grateful to them, as it says here, they are worthy offerings of Dharma, of the sacred, they're worthy of offerings. But moreover, they should also be objects of compassion, because on the basis of them actually doing something negative towards us, possibly, then they're actually accumulating negative karma. And that's where they should also be the object of compassion. So this is all something that's discussed very extensively in Shantideva's Way of the Bodhisattva, chapter 6. And you have a really good commentary also by Kimbo Kunsang Palden in the Nectar Speech of Manjushri. But because we're continually confronted with annoying circumstances in our life, this is such an incredibly relevant and helpful meditation, a helpful contemplation, helpful way to begin to shift our attitude. It's very provocative, but it's very real. It doesn't ever land in this it doesn't land in some sort of place of moral idealism of any kind. The logic of it is quite clear. And the applicability of it is, you could say, right there, with us very often being blessed by rich circumstances in which to practice this. Okay. 83. When the nature of these injuries is closely scrutinized, they lack enduring features. They're like figures traced on water. In an instant that the strident thought of wrath subsides, a state of space-like emptiness occurs, devoid of taking or rejecting. So here we're looking more at the ultimate reality. So the previous is more reflections that have to do with relative or conventional truth. This has more to do with how things actually are, ultimately, in reality. And he says here, as regards patience in connection with ultimate reality, it is important to reflect on the following point. If one investigates closely to see where the injury lies, in the aggressor, in the action itself, or in the victim of aggression, one will discover that it cannot be found anywhere. Okay, where is the evil? Does it exist in the aggressor, in the action itself, or the victim of aggression? We should investigate. But here, that's when we investigate, we should listen to how we investigate. As we have explained, when different circumstances coincide, it is the mind, with its tendency to construct existential situations, meaning the mind that falls into believing that things are in a particular way. Let's just see what they have here. Yeah, it's the mind that constructs or subscribes to a particular view. So it's the mind that fabricates the problem there and then. We might say, oh, it's not my mind, it's them out there, they're doing something really evil. But we have to remember our perception is what actually labels these particular actions and interprets them as such. We can see this if we examine, if we're willing to examine, if we're open to examining it, then we can see how very often we, for example, might misjudge a situation, or we might not know of the intention of the other, or we might have, you could say, an involvement that precipitates our particular reaction. But then again, also, we have to understand that even the object itself doesn't have any reality. That's where we might be assaulted by someone, but then again, if we analyze what is it actually that lies in that individual, what is it actually the conditioning that's there, then we run into an incredible, you could say, complexity of how that individual actually operates their conditioning and so forth, and the action itself. The more we analyze, the more this all falls apart. So that's where that if we're talking about how things really are, then we end up finding that there's nothing that we can actually really objectify and grasp as being sort of the quintessential injury or problem. And it says here, and if one examines the mind, it will be found not to possess any constant and immutable, indestructible characteristics. When one tries to trace a design on water, the pattern dissolves in the very instant of drawing. In the same way, as soon as the violence of hostile thought is allowed to subside, and that's this is where we, working with ourselves and investigating, then we have the perception. That's not the perception of whatever happens. That's, you could say, that's there and perhaps even clearer. But the thing is, when there's not the reaction and the annoyance and the fixation that comes from our, you could say, ignorance, then there's simply just an appreciation of this is happening. And that's where the arising takes place, but also it's liberated on arising. And that's what this is where when we begin to touch more on the actual nature of things. So that's where it says, for it is incapable of remaining on its own, unsupported by other factors. If we don't fixate on it, then phenomena themselves, they dissipate. And as such, then it says a totally pure and spacious state of mind appears, the primordial great emptiness, free from concepts. To preserve this state of openness, this simple presence, which is not something to be lost or gained, accepted or rejected, to preserve this without being distracted by other things, is called, on the profound path of the Madhyamika, the purification of defilement in ultimate reality. And that's where we then can see how sages, you might think, oh, the sage is really sort of a nice guy, but the sage is actually just not fooled by circumstances. So that kind of capacity here, the footnote says, this is also called the chöla ngesem ki serpa, patience that is a certainty with regards to the ultimate reality of things. So we have so many wonderful stories of individuals who practice this, and we can sort of say, wow, amazing, this person did this. But we can also actually ourselves practice this and see how, and first of all, identify how it's entirely on the basis of our subjective way of engagement that these things appear as solidly as they do. And to have that in mind first, then it makes sense to not get involved the way that we ordinarily do, gullibly believing in our belief systems. So that's why examination is hugely important. But then it also is intended to become second nature, that we actually are not deceived. And that's where then gradually there is this capacity to not be fooled by the appearances. And that's where we then talk about this kind of insight into the ultimate nature of things. So 84. When the three austerities of patience fail, to undertake the other five perfections, giving and the rest, is in the end like walking on a road beset with enemies. It's hard to reach the wished-for goal. So let us be stout-hearted. So without this, then the other paramitas are going to have a really hard time. It says, in conclusion, the arduous practice of patience has three phases: the earnest embracing of hardships, the patient toleration of the wrongs done by others, and the patience that is a fearless conviction with regards to ultimate reality. If the last kind of patience is lacking, The two other can never arise above the worldly path. And this is important because the last kind is the kind of patience that sees the nature of things. The first two, that means that we're just patient, that we sort of like stop ourselves from reacting. But the last one is actually just seeing how there's a hoax taking place. There's a deception taking place when we believe in the reality of things, the reality of the out there. It's, oh, it's the others, there's something wrong with them. What is it? We have this thing where we say, when someone points a finger, there's three fingers pointing at yourself, that sort of thing. But it's not really about blame. That's also important to understand. We're not blaming anybody, but we're just seeing that they don't exist the way that we solidify them. And so that's where this insight, the last one, the insight, is so important before the other ones. You could say the other ones, they have more of they're more like advice or moral direction. You know, it's going to be really bad to act without patience and with anger. But the thing is, it's the last one that actually makes this not just, you could say, moral and moral imperative of some sort, but very much it's the last one that makes us see how we're making a big mistake in believing in the nature of these things as solid. And so that's where that is so important. And that's where Kangyur Rinpoche says, it's the last kind of patience, this one that has insight. If that is lacking, the two other can never rise above the worldly path. On the other hand, if these two are absent or weak, then however much one may wish to acquire the qualities of the path and fruit through the practice of generosity and the other 5 paramitas, it will be difficult to achieve the object of one's aspirations. It is comparable to the difficulties encountered in trying to go somewhere all alone and without an escort, following a path that is haunted by enemies, robbers, and wild beasts. Therefore, we should summon up our courage and train in patience, cultivating strength of heart. So this is about the value of patience. So this is such a good thing. It's very helpful for me. I'm a very impatient, naturally grumpy, angry, reactive person. So I'm always sort of, this chapter here is very much speaking to me. And so I feel always incredibly inspired actually reading these teachings on patience, because they bring about a very realistic and extremely provocative perspective on something that takes place all the time and which clearly is destructive, like it starts off saying in the Bodhicharyavatara, there's no such an evil as anger, there's no such a virtue as patience. Yeah. Okay, I think we'll leave it at that and then just see if there's any questions here. In which way is the third patience different from the 6th paramita of wisdom? We could very well say it's the same. You know, it has as its object something that is particular, namely the object of the anger and also the subject of the anger. So in that way, there's a specific object. But the implication, which is ultimate reality, is in fact the same as the 6th paramita. So yes. Yeah. See. Oh, been meaning to drop in. Well, welcome. Welcome too. You just missed a really exciting discussion on patience, which is very helpful for us impatient people. So welcome too. All right. Are there any other questions?
Too bad for cold revenge, Jakob.
I know. All the sort of
such a shame.
I know. What is it? All those great movies by Sergio Leone.
That's right. That's what I was thinking.
So true, so true. Okay. All right. Nice to see you all. And oh, there's a question here. Should patients feel a certain way according to this teaching? How should it feel? Well, you know, it's actually it's a greatness of mind. So it's very much comes from a place of warmth. It's a warmth and intelligence. Because there's where normally actually with the lack of patience, we sort of shrink into a defensive mode. And that's where like us against them, right? Me against the other. But patience here is actually allowing for, you could say, an accommodation of the other. So there's a warmth, but there's also a clear seeing. And that's where these, you could say, these different aspects, one relative and one the absolute or the ultimate, they actually play into patience. So yeah. But you know, it's always a bit difficult when we say should, because that should comes with a sort of a prescriptive feeling, right? It should feel like this. It's very much about every one of us actually taking ownership of this, you could say, very provocative exercise. And that's how it will, you know, we'll feel it ourselves, you know. What should chocolate feel like? Well, we're just going to have to, you know, have a bit of chocolate ourselves and see what it feels like. Okay. Okay. Well, like I said, lovely to see you all, and we'll conclude with some dedication. Just a sec. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the oceans of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. So.